Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha.
This penchant of seeing us as other, he just seemed so superhero-like,
right.
Almost mythical. You know, humanized them. The fact that they were uniformed public servants did not stop them from becoming victims.
Marlon West prides himself on being a St. Louis native and a Black American in animation. He's an industry veteran of decades now, and his work as a visual special effects supervisor for Walt Disney Animation Studios brings characters and even water to vibrant life on screen. When COVID restrictions shut down production, closing offices across the country, and the murder of George Floyd came soon thereafter, Marlon was compelled to do what he does best: draw. Now his collection of hand-drawn portraits on gallery walls, comic book style, are on display at the St. Louis University Museum of Art. Here to talk with us about his Ink Tributes project and how it's come together here in his hometown, we welcome Marlon West. Marlon, it's a pleasure to speak with you in person today.
It's so delightful to see you in person and sit here and chit-chat. Yes.
Now, let's go back to the first half of 2020. That's when COVID restrictions shut down the world, and George Floyd's murder had spurred Black Lives Matter protests in May of that year. Marlon, where were you physically and mentally at that time?
Well, one of the things that did not really shut down is animation, at least at Disney. We all went home, and we were all working diligently on various projects. And I was at home, like most of my coworkers, working all day on Zoom calls, like most of the world. But I've been working for Disney for like 30 years as of this year, and I love it there. And I work in that building with a bunch of very talented folks who, so much better than me at doing caricatures and portraits and things, that I've really stayed in my lane as drawing effects, splashes and things like that, explosions. And honestly, I think it took being away from my exceedingly talented coworkers and being at home alone to feel emboldened enough to draw these images of these portraits in this comic style. So it's sitting at home, especially, late at night, I drew most of these. And I was very motivated to do them after George Floyd's murder. Brianna Taylor's killing had already happened, and my initial plan was to do 4 of these. It was going to be George Floyd, Brianna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and it was going to end with Kristen Cooper, who had survived his episode, and it was going to be a happy ending,
right,
4-part thing, but I ended up doing like 44 of them.
That's quite a few more.
Once I got going, I kept being motivated by one episode or another, the passing of someone like John Lewis and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or the anniversary of the 3 civil rights leaders who died, Emmett Till's birthday. So there just kept being things that would motivate me over time.
Yeah. And you drew these portraits in comic book style.
Yes.
Why is that?
I'm a unapologetic comic book nerd, and I feel very passionately that the comics are like a very American style of myth making. And most American comics are about superheroes, but Europe has folk tales, and we have comics, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
And I wanted to actually draw all these people in a way to kind of make them almost mythical, humanize them, because they're all were based on either like studio portraits where they're staring right at camera, or I would say the vast majority of them were selfies.
Right.
That they're staring at camera, and sometimes I've exaggerated that staring directly at the viewer, but it was kind of important to me to do this kind of not superhero series, because even though some of these people are quite heroic,
Right.
To actually draw them in a way that people would see Captain America or Spider-Man or the Hulk in a comic book kind of presentation.
Right. Now, you said that originally you meant it to be just 4. Then this project kept growing, and now it is a full exhibit at the St. Louis University Museum of Art. And you had mentioned earlier, too, that some of the portraits honor those who did not meet their death at the hands of police, or in unjust sort of situations. As far as the people that you chose who are living figures, what is it about their stories that inspired you to add them to this collection of portraits?
It was a different reason for everyone. Someone like our current Vice President, Kamala Harris, I did one of her. And that was one of the only ones that was like a super positive one. It was, when her and Joe Biden were initially elected. She was Vice President-elect when I drew that of her. Eugene Goodman was someone who, because I had been drawing them in this comic book style, there was a couple of photos of him running up the stairs or standing in this doorway that almost looked superhero-like.
Right.
And so he earned his spot. And so many of these folks, I think, one way or another, are standing up for civil rights or standing up for themselves in some way. So it was kind of arbitrary. I didn't have anyone. They were not assignments, so I didn't have to answer to anyone.
Right.
I drew them as I saw fit. I don't mind answering your question.
Right, okay. And Eugene Goodman is the police officer who was there when the Capitol Hill insurrection happened,
Yep.
right? Were you immediately drawn to, no pun intended, to Eugene Goodman because of what you were seeing him doing, and also against the backdrop of the way Black Americans have been presented in media?
Yeah, that and the fact that it wasn't lost on me that a lot of the folks that were assaulting the Capitol would rally behind a Blue Lives Matter mantle. And here they were in what was described by a lot of cops as almost a medieval-style battle for hours against police officers, men and women of all hues, and with throwing racial epithets at many of them. And so when I saw, I was very aware of the, I'm going to use irony for a polite word,
Okay.
Hypocrisy of what was going on there that day. But I saw a lot of images of Eugene Goodman that, like I said, looked almost heroic. Him standing in the doorway, him running up the stairs, and in this down shot. And I had already drawn like 40 of these or something. He was one of the last ones in this comic style, and that one he just seemed so superhero-like.
Right,
just some of
right.
his presentation, and so he was one of dozens of women and men, who some of which didn't survive that day, that were standing up for our nation in uniform. There was several people in uniform, including Brianna Taylor, who was an EMT, that I kind of wanted to remind people that some of these folks, the fact that they were uniformed public servants did not stop them from becoming victims.
Right. We're speaking today with Marlon West, Disney animator born and raised in St. Louis, and the artist behind Ink Tributes, a new exhibit at the St. Louis University Museum of Art. Now, the thing that I was imagining or reimagining was seeing the Eugene Goodman portraits, how big they are on the walls. And really, there isn't much more, I guess, that is comic book than what we're seeing here, like with that particular portrait. Another thing, that really stood out as I was looking at and standing among, really, these portraits that you've done are ones of people who are close to here or were close to here. So there's a portrait of Nina Pop, who was killed in Sikeston, Missouri, which is not that far from here. Was there something in particular about Nina that made you sure that she needed to be among the people you depicted?
Yes. Nina in particular, and Tony McDade, are trans people. I have a trans son. And I was aware just because some of the things that he posted about, I think, both of those stories, and I was alone in that house with him, and he, and my now wife, then fiance, I sent a screenshot to each of those drawings to get notes on, and then I would actually tweak them based on, and they were almost always about the eyes. Those two, Tony and Nina, were almost for him in some ways. And even though this is sitting in the museum right now, which I find utterly wonderful and more than a little surreal, because they were initially just social media posts. They were a cathartic project for me to sit with these folks and stare at their images and pay some type of tribute. And I drew them in a way, in a draw up tool at work. They're not even in Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. They were, when I drew them, I thought they might be temporary.
Yeah.
I mean, the original posts were strictly screenshots. And so I was doing them for me and for my kid and for people who, the few dozen folks who, follow me on various social media. They never went viral or anything, and I had no intention of ever seeing them big as they are.
Yeah.
I mean, the initial drawings are probably, they're digital drawings, even though I call them ink tributes, but they're pretty tiny.
Yeah.
Honestly, and to walk into a room and see them huge, in some ways larger than life, was really something.
Now, there's a blend of art and statement, right?
Yes.
Activism.
Yes.
And these Ink Tributes exhibition portraits, they're all black and white with one bright exception.
Yes.
And that's with your portrait of Christian Cooper, who's a black man falsely accused of harassing a white woman while he was bird watching in New York City's Central Park. And Christian is a gay man. He's a science writer. And Marvel Comics' first openly gay writer and editor. So
that's correct.
Talk about a connection there to comics. And his portrait features an American flag in rainbow pride colors. And that is one of the first it's first portraits that you see when you walk in. Then as you walk through, and at least for me, it dawned on me at the end that was where there was color. Why was that choice made?
Well, because that is a photograph of him wearing a pride flag. And so that drawing is based on a photograph of him. And to it made it a black and white, completely black and white photo, it would look like he was wearing either an American flag because it was limited to black and white, or it could have been the thin blue line flag. And it decidedly is a pride flag. So I wanted to make sure that out of all of the otherwise black and white images that I kept that color in his portrait.
Yeah.
It was important.
The color matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that case, it was very important. It would have said something else about potentially him as a person.
Yeah. I mean, so this is a deeply personal project for you. You talked about your son earlier. What was your son's reactions to the tributes, especially the ones that pertain to queer and trans people?
He appreciated them, but, he's a teenager, so I can only be so cool in his eyes.
Okay. Fair enough.
But he's been he was very, very supportive of them and all of them, and I think he liked them. He has seen the show both here and it initially started in Los Angeles. So he's been, as supportive and delighted as a cool 19-year-old can be.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Now, you'd started Ink Tributes with George Floyd. You went back in history. You have a portrait of Emmett Till, who was a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago, here in the Midwest, that was kidnapped and murdered in Drew, Mississippi in 1955 after being accused of harassing a white woman. And then that was later revealed to be a lie. Is there anything that you would like to reveal to be less than true for those who walk through this exhibit here in St. Louis, your hometown?
Less than true. I'm not sure. I have to say I was not prepared. This in my hometown, seeing it in 4 rooms that one could actually immerse themselves in. What I would love for people to experience is a certain level of intimacy with these portraits, because they're so large and they're so like I said, they're all staring into camera, that they take a moment to actually kind of maybe think about these people in a different light. If overall there's more than 40 of them, and these episodes they trend on and off, and they get replaced by another one, so I think hopefully maybe walking through this space you may see them as a nearly century-long narrative of how people very often treat mainly black people, because they're not exclusively black portraits. But this penchant of seeing us as other is a long history.
Yeah. You said that you never intended for these tributes to be seen by folks outside social media. So that's, people who follow you already and maybe those who are sharing. How is it that they came to St. Louis University Museum of Art specifically?
Well, a dear friend, Dr. Lori Shornick, is a professor of biology at SLU, and she reached out about it. And honestly, in both of the episodes where they've appeared, both at the Museum of Social Justice in Los Angeles, a friend of mine just reached out to the institution. And in both cases, it's changed based on the space. So that's also been a very cool collaboration, because these aren't pieces of artwork that are in frames. They're like digital images that have been moved around to be in the spaces that they inhabit. Both shows, if I dare call them that, are exceedingly different in presentation than the other.
And it'll be interesting to see what people end up sharing and the kinds of sort of exhibitions they end up putting together as they curate, what it is resonating with them. Marlon West is a Disney animator born and raised in St. Louis, and the artist behind Ink Tributes, which is a new exhibit at St. Louis University Museum of Art. Marlon, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been a delight.
This episode was produced, recorded, and edited by Maya Norfleet.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.